information asymmetry in finance. It's a vast topic, and there are like thousands and thousands of papers written about it. I cannot do any justice to the topic, and I'll follow Peter Condor's advice, and I'll just focus on things that are closer to my own papers or my own work. So things that, for example, I'm going to ignore are papers on information asymmetry among investors. So there is a vast literature on rational expectations, equilibria, where different agents or different investors know different pieces of information, and the question of how prices aggregate these different pieces of information. So I will not cover this in these two talks. What I'm going to cover more is the scenario where the information asymmetry is between the firms and the market or investors. Okay, so the market and the firm manager, for me, it's going to be the same. There is not going to be any question of moral hazard between the firm and the manager. So there's going to be one entity, and the other entity is going to be the market, which stands for the investors. And they're going to be, at least in the first talk and the second talk, it's going to be a very passive entity. They're just going to set prices to what is a value conditional on available information. So the talk's more or less going to follow the line of how firms communicate with the market, to communicate with investors. In the first talk, it's going to be communication through the security design. So it's going to be more of an implicit communication. So it's going to take the form, at least in the second model that we're going to examine, it's going to take the form of a signaling model. So the question is, what can you learn about the firm's private information from the choice of security that they offer? Okay. The second talk is going to be more about an explicit information channel, communication channel, and it's going to be about firms actually disclosing some information to investors, and we're going to see how such models look like. Okay, so maybe the best way of starting a talk about information asymmetry is just going back to the 1970s, to the lemons market, the famous lemons market by Akerlof. So the story is about a sailor who is privately informed. So we'll call his car, a lemon, which is has a value which is known to the seller but unknown to the buyers. Okay. So from the buyer's perspective, it follows some distribution that stands for their belief, F. Okay. The seller knows his value V. Buyers do not know. They do know that they do know how they value a car conditional on its value, and that's represented by U of V. Okay. Now I'm going to assume the trade is efficient, so it's common knowledge that the seller should sell the car to the buyer. There is no question about it. So U of V is greater than V. And I'm also going to assume that the market is competitive from the buyer's perspective, so meaning that the seller is going to capture all the surplus from this trade. Okay, and the contract will take the simple form that it's not going to be a sophisticated contract, warranties, on all other elements that you can think about in this market. It's just going to be a price, take it or leave it. The seller is selling one car for this price P. Okay, so that's like a very simple model and generated some interesting insights. Okay, no private information. Since the seller captures the entire surplus, he's going to select a price that matches the buyer's utility from the car. With private information, that's a new element in this model, is that now we have to set the price to be the conditional value of the asset, and that's conditional on the seller selling. So this is captured by a set theta, okay? And the set theta is a set of sellers that will going to sell the car at the price of P. So not all sellers would be willing to sell the car at a price P, okay? Meaning only lower sellers with lower values will sell the car for the value given this price, and the buyers need to condition on these facts, okay? And this, of course, can generate all sort of outcomes depending of what do we assume about the distribution and the utility function. So if we say in all three examples that the buyer values the car 50% more than the seller, then we can have a complete market breakdown if the prior distribution is that it's uniform, that the value of the car is uniform between 0 and 100. You can have an efficient outcome if the distribution is uniform between 50 and 150, and then the price is going to be 150. Okay. And you can have a partial trade. So I guess like the main lesson is that this conditional element that the buyers do account for the fact that there is some adverse selection in the market may generate some inefficient outcome. Doesn't have to generate inefficient outcome, but has a potential of generating inefficient outcome. So that's, I guess, like the main takeaway from such models. Okay.
Just a small part. I don't understand why the second example was efficiency. If the value is typically
if the value, yeah.
If D is 50, then the buyer's value is 75, right?
Right, and the seller.
And then
it's efficient in terms of the allocation.
it's efficient. I thought efficient means you trade when there's gains from trade.
There are so
So if
It means efficiency is when the car goes to the person who values it most.
okay, it does, but it doesn't in this case. It doesn't get sold. It stays with the seller because the price is 150.
the price is 150. The buyer doesn't know that his value is 50. He doesn't know that the car type is 50.
Oh, I see. Here, the average value is 75. Okay,
The average value is 100.
yeah, right.
From the buyer's perspective,
So
yes.
okay. No, so it's okay.
Okay. Okay. Okay. So let's try to make this model a bit more sophisticated, and suppose that the seller has two cars. Okay. I don't know if that's the best choice, but let's continue with this. He has one is an SUV and one is a sports car. Okay. A high quality seller has both a more valuable SUV and a better sports car. So that's what we're going to assume. Okay. And the first moment in terms of values of the SUV and the sport car is the same. Okay. The only difference between a sports car and an SUV is that I assume that there is higher dispersion when we talk about values of sports cars. So a really good sports car is really, really valuable, and a really bad sports car has very little value. And that's compared to an SUV, which is not only a safer car, but also safer when it talks to values. Okay? May or may not be a good one.
Just pollutes more.
Pollutes more. So I only care about dispersion of values, no pollution or actually safety. So for example, you can think about a case where the prior distribution of an SUV car is that it's uniform between 25 and 75. And of that a sports car, it's uniform between 0 and 100. And I said that the sellers, there is a one-to-one matching between the value of an SUV and the value of a sports car. So that's captured by the second line. The value of a sports car is twice as much the value of the SUV minus a 50. Okay? So you have two cars on your parking lot. Okay? And the question that we may ask is which car to sell. Suppose you sell one car Okay, you know the lemons market, which car would going to be a better choice to sell? Are you going to sell the safer car or the more riskier car, like the sports car or the SUV? Okay, so you can ask questions that, for example, suppose that this buyer, first I should say, the buyer observes the type of car. He knows that he's being sold an SUV or a sports car. The seller picks one car to sell, and you can have two versions. One is a regulator who wants to maximize efficiency. So he dictates the seller which cars to sell. So he tells him, you know, you should sell an SUV or you should sell a sports car. Okay. And a second version is that the seller picks which car to sell. Okay. And buyers need to condition on this selection. Okay. So in the first case, there is no signaling from the selection of the car. Right? The regulator picks which car to sell. Okay. In the second case, it's a little bit more sophisticated because we need somehow to figure out what does it tell us about a seller who chose to sell us a sports car. Is it good news or bad news? Does it tell us anything about the seller? Okay. So the reason why I picked this variant of the Arkelov model, I'm not going to solve this model, okay? But it demonstrates one element that we're going to see in the model that I'm going to describe is there's going to be, we can think about it like product design. Okay, a security design is like picking a car. You have a choice of which car to sell, okay? And we're going to see a first model. I think the first model is going to be the classic, the Marson-Majalov pecking order paper, which falls more into the first category. We take as given the type of cars, the type of security that is being sold, and we ask what is the implication in equilibrium of this choice. The second model, I'm going to follow Nachman and O paper, that's a 94 paper. That's going to be more following the second variant. So the seller is going to pick a security to sell, and we're going to need to figure out what does it tell us from the choice of securities being sold, what does it tell us about the type of the seller? Okay, so the first model is going to be rather simple. The second version is going to be more sophisticated because the security is like a, like a high-dimensional object. So, and very different, there are like many different aspects of the security. So the question is, what is the most important aspect of the security that conveys the most information, that we can actually figure out what does it tell us about the seller? Okay, so I think somehow you don't see the top line, so I'm going to focus first, so the first paper I'm going to describe is a pecking order paper by Marson-Majalov. The second paper I'm going to talk about is a Nachman and O paper about signaling for a security design. Okay. Now, the Nachman and O paper, actually I'm going to present it a little bit different from, it's pretty much the same as like in Nachman and O, but I'm going to present a little bit differently. And the reason why I'm going to present a little bit differently, it's because I had this paper with Andy Skrepach and Peter DeMarzo, and then we used some, we proved some lemma about security design. So I'm going to use this lemma to prove the Nachman and O result. And maybe if I have time, I'm also going to go into the security design in the paper with Andy and Peter, which is papers 10 years after Nachman and O. It's a little bit different setup. It's more about security design in auctions, but you're going to see the same element coming up in this setup. Now I can tell you, I can spoil like what the punchline is going to be. The punchline is going to be, it's all going to be some sensitivity of the security to the private information. Okay. And the intuition is that the more you have the higher the sensitivity is, the more problematic the trade is going to be, because the buyer should be more suspicious of what's going on in this market. So there is an advantage for securities that are less sensitive to the private information. Okay, that's going to be a common theme. Now, how do you capture sensitivity of a security to private information? I'm going to show that it's going to boil down to some signal crossing property. Okay, so that's going to be the common theme. So even before going to this result, we can speculate, and we're going to be correct, that's going to be an advantage for less sensitive securities, and less sensitive securities in our framework is going to be cash, if it's possible to have some cash or risk-free assets, or the second best alternative is going to be debt. Okay, and equity in comparison would be a more a security with a higher sensitivity, so it's not going to be the natural choice for trade. Now, so that's going to be sort of like the solution to the equivalent of these two cases in the mode that I'm going to examine. Okay. Now, it's not going to be that always we're going to see debt being offered, so I'm going to discuss why in an auction framework there is an advantage of selecting a more sensitive security. Yeah.
So in practice, debt actually is often preferred for financing to equity. Do you propose this as an explanation for how often we see debt?
So first, I was the one proposing it, but that was like the typical, that was a classic, yeah. So the yeah, so there are also, I should mention, I mean, the question of security design, there are other factors that affect the choice of security design. There are tax issues, that debt also has some tax issues. There are moral hazard issues that also come with the choice of security. I'm going to focus on information, on asymmetric information. I do think that it's a very important factor behind the security design, but I don't think that it can explain everything that goes into the question of security design. There are many other important factors behind security design. Like Ben Holmstrom, I think he's a big fan of using debt because of its has this asymmetric information advantage. So some people are more convinced that 90% of the explanation goes into why we see debt used so often is based on information asymmetry. I don't know if I have such strong views. So, yeah.
Is that an different regularity of time to
So the regularity would be, you know, why we see debt is going to be such a common selection of security design. But right now, I wouldn't go, I'm not going to go, maybe in the second paper, the second talk is going to be more about specific empirical regularities. So right now, it's more just providing like a general framework about the relation between information asymmetry and security design. So I know that it's not the most satisfactory answer that one can think about, but I'm just going to, it's okay. I'm going to give the... yeah. Okay. Now, before going into the question of security design, so I guess many of you know this result, this classic result in finance. People who are more like got a PhD in economics may be less familiar with this result. So it's important to state this fact. So a classic result in finance, it's a Modigliani-Miller theorem. Way back to the 50s, which states that in a frictionless economy, security design is completely irrelevant. Okay, so I won't prove it. The argument is quite elegant, of an arbitrage argument, of showing that any financing decision, anything that you can think about, a decision that's taken by a firm is irrelevant if you don't account for the friction. Okay, so in this talk, the information asymmetry is a friction, and that's going to be the main friction in this talk. Okay, so let's start with the Modigliani-Miller, with the Myers and Magluf pecking order paper. In the Myers and Magluf paper, starts with describing an entrepreneur who seeks some investment, okay, and there is no question about the return on this investment. So the return of this investment is positive. Okay, so the required rate of return is 0, and this investment generates a return which is greater than 0, or a gross return which is greater than 1, and that's commonly known. Okay, so both the entrepreneur and investors know that it's a good investment. Okay, now the source for information asymmetry is at the value of asset in place, or legacy assets. Okay, and that's denoted by X. Okay, so it's the firm conditional on raising the funds, raising the investment, will invest and generate a total value of X plus I times R. X the value of the existing assets, I is the required investment, R is the return on this investment. And if the project is not undertaken, the value is going to be X. Okay? It's a simple two-period mold, so in the next period, tomorrow, the firm is going to be liquidated, and that's going to be the value of the asset that the firm would have. Okay. Similar to the lemons market, the entrepreneur knows the private information, knows X. Okay. Investors do not know at least the value of X, but they have a belief about X which is given by F. Okay. Exactly. Okay. So the first observation that if the entrepreneur has internal funds, there is no question what will happen. He will invest. He will invest and realize his project. Okay. If he had, if he could issue debt, okay, and if he could issue risk-free debt, then also there wouldn't be any problem, because no matter what the value of X is, the future proceeds from the project are more than enough to cover for the initial investment. So because X, I assume X is going to be positive, okay, so the future value, which is X plus I times R, is more than enough to cover the investment. Okay. So with cash on hand, or if outside, or if we would raise the investment through debt, then we wouldn't have any trouble. We wouldn't need to think about this private information. Investors don't need to worry about what the value of X is. It's completely irrelevant for them. Okay. The question is, so what would happen with a different form of external funding? Not debt, so I'm going to examine equity. And then we're going to see something which is similar to the Akerlof problem, that not all profitable investment opportunities are going to be realized. Okay? And the logic is going to be pretty much the same. Okay? Okay, so this, I think, more or less I said, that debt with a face value is riskless, but we don't have a problem with that. Okay, so to analyze this model, we start first with asymmetric information case. Suppose that investors know exactly what the value X is. There is no asymmetric information. And they're supposed to provide this investment A, provide this funding of I, provide this external funding of I, okay? And in return, they are going to get a fraction of the firm. This is an equity financing, okay? So they, in return for their investment, I get a fraction of alpha. And in period 1, this fraction, their stake in the firm, is going to be worth alpha times X plus I times R. Okay? And to figure out what this value of R alpha should be, it's follow this very simple expression. Okay? Now, we can ask ourselves, well,
What do you mean the capital market is competitive that investors get no surplus?
right, exactly. So this is, yeah. So I should, thanks, Jose. So this is equivalent of the, in the Akerlof mold, the buyers, there is a competitive market for buyers, meaning all the surplus is captured by the seller. Okay, so this is the equivalent of this. Okay? So investor just break even, not more than that. Okay? So we can continue with this example and ask ourselves, well, given that alpha has its value, would the entrepreneur, no matter what the value of X is, go along with this investment? And the key for this is whether or not the remaining stake in the firm is worth more than what they had initially. So this is this inequality here. Okay. And you can do a little bit of algebraic manipulation, write this inequality here, plug in the exact alpha stars that we derived before, and figure out that this always holds. Okay. Actually, I didn't need to go through all this algebra. I could guess that that always would be. Right? Can you see why I didn't need to do any of this algebra? I could immediately say that for all values of X, the seller would go along with this investment. Exactly. The buyers extract zero surplus. The project does generate a positive surplus, so the only place that the surplus can go to is a seller. So I didn't even need to do all of this to conclude that in 100% of the cases, the project is going to be realized. Okay. So next is the case of asymmetric information. And now, only the entrepreneur knows the quality of X, or knows the value of X. And it's going to be the equivalent of the Akerlof model. We're going to have a single price, a single alpha. Okay. And the entrepreneur needs to be convinced that given the belief and knowing the strategy of the entrepreneur, they break even on average. Okay, so this is captured by this equality here. Okay, alpha times the average value of the firm conditional on the entrepreneur seek financing is exactly their investment. And theta is a set of agents, a set of entrepreneurs that would seek financing under these terms. Okay. So this is given by this set here, the set of X for which what is written here is alpha times X, which is what they give to investors from their existing asset, is lower compared to what they gain from the profit from the new project. Okay? So this is captures that you have to have X to be low enough to go along with this investment. Only low value X would go along with this financing deal. Okay, so let's go with some simple example. Okay, so let's suppose that the intrinsic value of the firm is uniform between 0 and 50. The required investment is 50 and has a net return of 20%. Actually, should say a gross return of 1.2 or a net return of 20%. Okay. Now, looking at the previous statement, or what does it tell us about the value of X? Right? It tells us that X has to be lower than some values. The values just divide by alpha. It turns out that X has to be lower than Y minus alpha over alpha times 60. Okay, can you see? I mean, this is simple transition from the previous statement. Okay, so I times R, that's the 60. And everything else is pretty much the same. Okay. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a question about the setup. So implicitly, this model assumes that the investors can see the value of the firm ex post, because they have equity. They have to know the value of the firm exposed in order to get their share of the equity.
Right.
But for some reason, they can't see the value of the firm ex ante.
Right.
Is there some story about why they can't ex ante?
So you ask why there is, why, so why, what you ask in a different way is why entrepreneurs or managers may have better information compared to investors.
At least ex ante.
Ex ante.
They don't have better information.
So since the end of, the second period, that's the end of the mold, so there is no future period. Okay. I think it's more about why does it make sense that managers or the firms or existing shareholders know more about the firm compared to outside investors.
But we don't really need that because if you think really the way equity is issued, then an infinite horizon claim. I mean, here we're collapsing into periods to make the argument more clear. You have an infinite horizon claim, so then all you have to know is how much profits the firm generated that period. So if you're an inside shareholder, presumably you can see those things. If you're a shareholder, presumably you can see that these things are audited and so on. So your entrepreneur could still sell the money, and that's a different literature. Presumably, the entrepreneur cannot steal the money, and then it seems reasonable they observe the stream of profits, even though they never figure out what X really was. They just observe the stream of profits over time. There would be uncertainties, shocks, etc. The model is more complicated. So I think what he's trying to do is make it as bare bones as possible.
Even if you do something you want, in compares, suppose as an R&D project, it's a strategic you don't want to tell the world about it, the next period you are going to tell the world about it. And that's it. And basically the story is about the new investors, when they buy a share in the firm, they're buying a share also in this R&D project, which they know exists, but they don't know how much it's worth, because the insiders know a better assessment of how much it is worth. It will be known to the world more.
But here, they know how much the R&D project is.
The insiders know.
Everyone, R is common knowledge.
No, X.
X is not
But
X is in place.
But X isn't even invested.
No,
I understand, but
it's
you
passive.
have to add
It's the
some
fruit
form
of
of
passive
assurance.
investment. The firm is not going to concern. Yesterday there was an investment in X. Today, the insiders know how much it is worth, but for strategic reasons cannot or will not tell that to the world. But tomorrow, the world will know that. And the new guys, they're already buying a share in the X right now, without knowing how much it is worth. That's the story. I think that's a fair description.
Yeah. So I think as long as you're willing to accept that insiders know more about the future cash flow of the firm, I think we're fine. And we can, I think as Jose said, the two-period version is a simplified version of, a more realistic story where it's an infinite horizon.
It's not just that they know more, that they do not want to reveal those.
They don't want to reveal, and in some cases, even if they want to reveal, it's going to be like even just saying without selling equities or selling stocks, it's going to be like a cheap talk. Of course, they're going to say, well, my firm is great and the value of my existing assets is really, really high, but naturally you're going to be suspicious.
Information that is not
Yeah.
verifiable or verifiable and they don't want to reveal.
Yeah. Yeah, either it's not verifiable or I cannot really prove it. Yeah. So, okay, so let's continue with this for a moment. So, what we can figure out is that the outcome of this model is that only, we said that let's go back, the set of firms is captured by uniform distribution between 0 and 50, but only 20%, the lower 20% of this firm would actually realize this investment. Okay? So the equilibrium is that only types for whom X is below 30 would go along with this investment, and they're going to sell a stake of 2/3 in the company. Alpha is going to be worth 2/3. Okay? So the conclusion is, if we're going back to the lemons market, as we're going to have a very partial trade. Only 20% of the trade has been conducted. Okay, only the lowest 2 decile actually realizes investment, and the reason is the same as Arkelov model. There is a suspicion about who actually is willing to give a stake in a firm, knowing that the firm may be worth a lot. Okay, and this type of questioning lead to this at least partial market breakdown that it's been shown in this model. Okay, so now in some sense, when I first saw this argument, it seems to be like one-to-one, almost like the Arkelov argument, but I think it goes a step beyond, because it does talk about the product design. It does talk about the issue whether or not it's an SUV or a sports car that you're issuing, because we know that if it was debt contract, we wouldn't have this problem. Okay, with a debt contract, 100% of the entrepreneurs would raise funds and realize this project. The problem is in the form of security that was offered. The form of security was not the right form of security given this information asymmetry. Okay. Okay. Now we can ask ourselves, can we get efficient outcomes? Other parameters, set of parameters that we're going to get like an efficient outcome, and the answer is yes. We can, if the return from this investment are high enough, then we're going to get 100% of the entrepreneurs actually realize this investment. Okay, so that's going to be like, remember I had like for the Arkelov model 3 cases, so that's going to be like the first case. We can also say, can we get a complete market breakdown that we saw in the Arkelov model? So what do you think? Can we get that no entrepreneur can actually raise some funds in such a model? Yeah.
Well, the lowest type can always finance the still
Okay.
measure.
Can it be a positive probability?
I guess it's possible that it's not the case.
That it's not. Okay.
That only a zero measure of investment.
Okay. So let me try to argue otherwise, at least with no pathological assumptions about the distribution. So think about the types, their decision of whether or not to go with this financing. They really like the project. The project then generates a surplus, and they, in principle, capture the surplus from this project. The problem that they face is the underpricing, because they might have their value of X is lower than the average pool, the average X for the pool of entrepreneurs that do seek financing. Okay. So they do like the investment, it generates a surplus that goes, in principle, they capture the surplus. They don't like the underpricing, and this underpricing is the difference between I'm relatively a high X in this pool of entrepreneurs who seek financing compared to the average X in this pool. Okay? So to balance these things, you need the wedge, you need like a positive wedge. Right? And so in principle, you won't get like a market breakdown, right? I mean, the benefit from the project, at least in this type of model, would guarantee that it's not just going to be the lowest type, the lowest X that will actually seek financing. So it's not going to be as severe as in the Arkelov model. Okay, so that's the Mars and Majluf. So let's go now into the Nachman and No paper. Okay. So the Mars and Majluf argue for the advantages in using debt, but this was talking about, remember, like the 2 cases that I have for the car, this was a scenario that fits better a case where a regulator fixes the choice of securities that being offered. We never ask what would happen if the entrepreneur would choose which security to offer. and what is the signaling implication of such an offer. Okay? Is it going to be the case that also in such an environment, the debt is going to be the natural outcome for this game? Yeah. So I'm not sure full of it. So the project, let's think about this example. The project generated a surplus of 10, right? It's 50, 20% return. A surplus from 50, you generate 10. So the surplus was 10. The 10 in principle should go to the entrepreneur, okay? So he's happy. I mean, his motivation to go with this investment is to capture this, this value of 10. Now what works against it is that investors value the existing asset less than what they really are. Okay? And what is this difference? The difference is the most severe case is you're like the highest types that is still seeks financing, and his underpricing is based on what is his value for X and what is the average value of X in this pool of entrepreneurs who seek financing. So the top X and the average X. Okay. If it was just the lowest type, seek financing, then it's clear there is, he's not indifferent. He really wants his project because you only have the first effect going in his direction. You need some mass, a non-trivial mass of entrepreneurs who seek financing. That's going to be a wedge between the top X and the average X that exactly is going to balance the benefit of the project like this 10 that I had before. So that's his trade-off. So this is why you need like a positive mass. At least, I don't know, I didn't think about pathological examples, but in general, at least with continuous distribution, you will have this positive mass. Okay. Okay. Okay, so next what we're going is like the more sophisticated mole, which are described by Nachman and Nob. That the entrepreneur picks a security. Okay, and the investors on the market update the belief given this choice of a security. Okay, and as we said, it leads to a signaling game. Okay, the mole is very similar to the Mars and Majluf mole, but written in a little bit more abstract way. Okay, so there are going to be again two dates. Again, the entrepreneur seeks financing in the amount of I for a project. Okay. And the project is going to generate some future cash flow, which is given by V. Okay? And here it's going to be uncertain. Okay? So unlike what we had before, even from the entrepreneur side, he doesn't really know what the future cash flow is going to be, but he has some educated guess what it's going to be. So he has a signal X about his future cash flow V. So he has better information about the future cash flow. Okay, so the difference between investors and the entrepreneur is this signal X. Okay. So I didn't have it in the slide. There is some prior distribution. Probably if I ever use the notation, it's given by F, which represents the prior belief of the market, and the entrepreneur has has better information because of this signal. Okay. So what is a security? A security is going to be some sharing rule. Okay, there's going to be the total size of the pie is going to be given by V. Okay, and S of V is what is going to be the entrepreneur is going to pledge to the market, to investors. He's going to keep V minus S of V, and investors are going to get S of V. So this is what I call a sharing rule. I'm going to assume that S of V is going to be non-decreasing.
Can't you prove that it's going to be non-decreasing?
No, I think you really need, so for this, I think you need to have it to be non.
So the entrepreneur
At least
might want to choose an S which is
Yeah, that's Yeah, so although that is plausible, I think this is, at least I didn't see an argument that shows that it has to be non-decreasing. Only, again? V is going to be known in the future, so that's going to be verifiable. That is going to be a two-period mold, and that's going to be the equivalent of the Meyerson-Majluf. Okay. So you can, I don't know, Peter's way of justification is saying, Peter de Marzo's justification is, well, if S of V is going to be non-decreasing, you're going to have some moral hazard issue of burning cash or all sort of other measures that the entrepreneur can take exposed and exploit the fact that it's non-decreasing. The fact that he's even, when he started arguing, when I asked him this question and started going this explanation, give me an educated guess that this is, there was not like a clean argument why you needed to make this assumption. Okay, I can think about it maybe during the break, but I don't think that, my guess is that there is no clean argument why S of V has to be non-decreasing, although this is like the most natural assumption. I mean, we don't have security. In practice, we don't see securities that are decreasing. Yeah. No, yeah, so that's going to be a feature, not an assumption.
You would add here some argument of the entrepreneur that it could affect the value of the.
Yeah, so that's
basically reduce it in some way.
so that's a Peter way out, but I'm not. But that's using a reason outside this mold. So and Eric was asking, can we, without adding an additional ingredient to the mold? So at least for realistic purposes, I bought this Peter's argument, but we can think of whether or not there is a more elegant argument. Okay. So we talked about this. So the S is going to be a non-decreasing function from V to 0 to the interval 0 to V. So it's a sharing rule. And given that the information of the entrepreneur is given by the signal X, what he expects to pay investors is the expected value of S of V given X. And he expects to keep the expected value of V minus S of V given X. Okay? So that's how the model looks like. Okay, so here let's just plot like the contract or the securities that I described before, the debt and the equity, how they look like. So a debt contract look like this. Okay, so on the, so on the x-axis, that's the value V, and here is the S of V, and a debt contract is you capture everything up to the face value, up to D, and later on you just get V, so that's a debt contract. Okay. And equity, it's a fraction, so it's a fraction alpha of the total pi, so if you give half of the firm, alpha equals a half, so the slope of this line is a half. Okay, so that's how the different security look like. Okay, so here is property number one, which is going to be important in this analysis. Think about all the securities, all the, again?
Why is Peter equity or debt? Reason.
No, it's so I'm not sure. So this,
The entrepreneur has to fund this business through equity or through debt. Or
no, he can pick any S of V that he can think he can take. So this is just two examples. Yeah. You can think about hybrid securities, part debt, part equity, anything is going to map to some S of V that we can plot. Okay. So he can pick anything that he likes to pick, okay, as long as it's increasing. It's between 0 and V. Okay. So one property which is going to play a key role here is that any security that is going to pick is going to cross the debt contract from below. You're going to have single crossing. If at all, there's going to be a single crossing, and it's going to cross the debt from below. And the reason is, for low values, debt pays more than other securities because it pledges the entire value of the firm to investors. Okay? And only at a later stage, for higher values, the payout is flat. Okay, so for high values, that pays more. For low values, it pays more. For high values, it pays less. And this gives us a single crossing picture.
You could have security use up to a smaller value, the same payoff as that, the whole value of the firm, and then it kind of goes below there, so and then first would cross again. So, and it depends on the whole crossing here, right? So you could have a security that follows the 45-degree line, but not all the way to B.
Up to here.
Yeah,
And then like this.
That, and it could cross
Yeah, so I wouldn't call this a crossing point. So this, for me, this is a crossing point. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that's fact number one. The fact number one is just reminding ourselves that plotting things in the scale like V versus S of V is not the right metric, because from the game, the way the game is being played is from the perspective of the signal, from X. Okay? So instead of plotting the picture of S as a function of V, we should think about S as a function of X. Okay? So if we let E of S of X denote the expected value of S of V given X, that's going to be a more appropriate measure of what the entrepreneur thinks he gives to investors. Okay? The value of the security that he gives out to investors is ES of X. Okay? And the question is how, so we had these conditions about S of V being increasing and single crossing properties. So the question is whether or not these properties still hold when we plot them as a function of X. Okay, because that's the right metric. So again,
It's a function of X.
it's a function of X. Well, it's the expected value of S of V given X.
Which is not a, yeah,
Which is a number now.
It's a number, yeah, it's a number, yeah.
notation.
All I'm saying that we need to think about this picture. That's the more relevant picture.
Earlier we were just saying that the E there is superfluous.
Right, but otherwise I need to somehow to denote that that's not S of, to differentiate between, I could pick a different letter, correct? But it just reminds me that I thought it's a better notation, but yeah. Okay. So we would try to see how this plot look like. X, E of S of X and E is this function as a function of X. Okay. And for this, we need somehow to discuss what is the relation between X and V. X as a signal, what does it tell us about V? I mean, we had the intuition, or at least we probably have the intuition, that a higher X implies that you have a higher belief for V. So X as a signal implies a higher belief regarding the value V, but somehow we have to figure out what is exactly this relation that and how it will, the exact relation between X and V, and how does it show in this picture of EX compared to ES of X. Okay, so let's talk about what does it mean that you have a higher belief. Okay, so the most natural way of defining what does it mean to have a higher belief is given by first order stochastic dominance. Okay, so here are two distributions of V, and I would say that the second distribution, V2, represents a higher distribution compared to V1. So V2 is you have 3 with probability 0.25, you have 2 with probability 0.25, you have 1 with probability 0.5. V1 is 1 or 2 with probability 0.5. And probably most of you recognize that this is that V2 first order stochastically dominates V1. Okay. What do we mean by first order stochastic dominance? We can describe V2 as if conditional that you have V1 plus some additional element. So conditional in V1 that you have 2, then you get like a lottery that with probability 50% you're going to get like an additional unit. So it's V1 plus some positive element. Okay, so we can describe V2 in this way. And V2 would have a higher moment, a higher first moment, and would have this property of the first order stochastic dominant. Okay. Now, the question that we want to ask is whether or not under this ranking, if when we say a higher X, meaning a higher distribution of V, will it keep our two properties of monotonicity and single crossing also for the space of X? Okay. So first, monotonicity. If we have first order stochastic dominance, if S of V was monotone or non-decreasing, is it also the case that ES of X is also going to be monotone? Okay, so the answer is written here. It's not too complicated. S of V is going to be if S of V is increasing, the fact that you have this additional element, this additional positive element, okay, that if you have, say, x2 and x1, and x2 represents a higher signal, okay, the fact that x2 generates a distribution with an additional extra kick, this positive kick, means that you expect to get a higher payoff. Okay. So we have two signals. So I want to write things in terms of the signals that the entrepreneur has. He has signal x2 or x1 or x whatever. Okay. So I want to have a statement of what does it mean that he has a signal of 2 rather than a signal of 1. Okay. So I want to say that given a signal of 2 rather than a signal of 1, he has a higher. His belief about the value of V represents a higher distribution. So a higher distribution, for me here, is the first order stochastic dominance. Okay. So first order stochastic dominance will preserve monotonicity. So I can describe again in this way. Now the question is, will it preserve the single crossing property? Okay. And the answer is no. Okay. And the reason is that we'll need like a stronger property. So think about the previous example that we had. V2 was a higher distribution compared to V1. There was no question about it. Okay. All of us would prefer the lottery represented by V2 compared to the lottery of V1. Okay. But now suppose that I ask you, what is your belief conditional on the event, okay, that V is smaller than 3? Do you prefer V2 or V1? Okay. V1, conditional on 3, being V smaller than 3 doesn't change anything. Still, you think that 1 or 2 are equally likely. Conditional, if you take V2, conditional on V smaller than 3, has a bite. And now you think that, well, with probability 2/3, I'm going to get 1, and only with probability 1/3, I'm going to get 2. So once you conditional on some event, even though that V2 was a better distribution compared to V1, conditional on this event, V2 looks worse compared to V1. So to prevent this from happening, we need a stronger condition. And this is this monotone likelihood ratio property, or the strict monotone likelihood ratio property. And that would prevent for this from happening. Okay. So the strict monotone likelihood ratio property, it's a stronger form of domination. So when we say second distribution dominate the first distribution, the first distribution, what we mean is that the likelihood ratio Ft over V of V divided by F1 of V is strictly increasing in V. Okay? And yeah. We'll see. So I think once we get the single crossing property in place, we'll see that everything will follow immediately. It's going to be almost a corollary of the single crossing property.
About the first order stochastic dominance, what happens, for example, if you have two lotteries that none of them first order stochastically dominating the other? So you cannot represent all the lotteries by...
Yeah, it's for sure it's a partial order. And this is, so you have first order stochastic dominance is a partial order, and clearly, strictly, which is stronger than first order stochastic dominance is a partial order.
You cannot actually say for all lotteries which one is...
Yeah. Okay. So strict monotone likelihood ratio property is a stronger property than the first order stochastic dominance. And what it gives us, it's in some sense, it gives us this first order stochastic dominance on any conditioning event. So no matter what the event is, then you can say the second distribution is better than the first distribution. Okay. Okay. Right. So we're going to impose this restriction. So to prove this claim, I guess maybe the one thing which, in the beginning, it's not so clear that you need such strong structure to prove the Nachman and no result, that that is the most natural security. So for me, like the more interesting element from the theory perspective is that you need this kind of structure to get it going. And once you realize that conditioning an event, first order stochastic dominance cannot be preserved, you understand that you really need it, because the security is really putting more weight on certain events compared to other events. So it's similar to condition on certain events. Okay, so you really need a stronger property, which is given by the strict monotone likelihood ratio property. Okay.
So without that assumption, are there counterexamples to the Nachman and no
Yeah.
conclusion?
Not that one that I can create offhand, but yes. It's really a needed assumption. So in our setup, the two beliefs that we worry about are conditional on two signals, say x2 and x1, x2 being a higher signal than x1. And our domination is that the likelihood ratio conditional on x2 is higher to x1. Here I just manipulated inequality a little bit different, but it's the same. I mean, if we divide by the fv of 1 given x2 and multiply by fv of 2 given x1, we'll get the same as we had before. Maybe I should have put it on the slide. But it's exactly, believe me that I didn't cheat you. It's exactly the same inequalities that I had before. So far, I wasn't cheating you. Here is one property of this this monotone likelihood ratio property. So let's define what does it mean that a function from two variables is supermodular. So a function is supermodular if we have, in some sense the differences are the sensitivity to the second to the value of v, so the increase in the value between v1 and v2 are higher when you consider a higher x, if you consider an x2 rather than x1. So this is supermodular. So the higher, that when you increase v, it has a bigger effect, a bigger positive effect compared to when you have a lower value of the x. It's like a cross derivative. Yeah, so, yeah. So, but I'm not picky, so I'm going to assume. So let's just note that SMLRP, if we take log from this inequality here, it's equivalent to supermodularity of the log of f. Okay, and we're going to call it log supermodularity. And as you correctly say, I mean, we can just say that it's about the cross derivative being positive. Okay, so we're going to assume differentiability. I'm not picky about capturing all pathological examples, so for me, assuming differentiability is more than fine. So we're going to have that the cross derivative is positive. Okay, so now what I want to show is that this is going to be sufficient to maintain. This is exactly the condition that we need to have in order to maintain the strict monotone likelihood ratio property. Okay. Okay, and this I think, Idan, you were asking why are we interested in strict single crossing property? Okay, the strict monotone likelihood ratio property will let me conclude that if I look at two securities, okay, I'll have which type prefer to think about this security 2 and this security 1. Which type would prefer? Suppose that both securities are being accepted by investors, so they have a choice. They can pick and choose which security to offer, the first security or the second security. Which types are going to be more tempted to offer the first security? Strong types or low types? High types or low types? High X or low X? So the first security, okay, these are securities that are going to be viewed as expensive, okay, for low types, okay, and the second securities, that's going to be the choice for the low types because they think that it's more likely that the values are going to be low, okay, and from their perspective, that's a more relevant event, okay, and they're more tempted to offer the second security. Okay, so generally speaking, we're going to have high types prefer to offer the first security, while low type prefer to offer the second security, and that's this partition that will generate this result.
If you didn't have single crossing, then you would have these contiguous regions where a particular type would want to offer the security. That would certainly complicate the analysis, but would it be impossible?
So I think it's a bit echoing the other question. So I'm guessing yes, but whether or not I can pick a condition that is maybe not the first of the stochastic dominance, maybe not exactly the similar peak condition, still has to play, I'm not 100% sure. I'm guessing that if I also like an elegant model, then the answer is no. Whether or not I can pick some peculiar condition in between, I'm not 100% sure. But I'm pretty sure about the elegant. If we want also something which is going to be clean, if I want like a clean argument, I'll need to put some simple argument. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so that's the intuition of how it partitions the types. It pre-selects the types into securities based on the single crossing property. How to prove the single crossing property from this log supermodularity. The proof looks like this. Maybe I'll spend 1 or 2 minutes on this, but let's not too bad into the details here. We can define the difference between pick two securities that we had before that remind us of two crosses, one from below. So there is a crossing point V star for 1 and 2, for security 1 and security 2. And I'm looking at a second crossing point in the space of X star of 1 and 2. And I argue that at this point X, okay, the second security is going to have a higher slope, a higher derivative compared to the first security. And it's not going to be it's not even just for this crossing point, it's also going to be for any value higher than this crossing point X. So that's how the argument works. So you define H as the difference between the two securities, define E of H using the same analogous notation for the difference in the E of H function, and think about these two crossing points, the V star and the X star. And what I want to argue is that you have this slope of at the crossing point x star being positive, and a similar argument that that's also for higher x will also be going to be true. And the proof for this is not complicated. Is saying, you know, E of h of x, you just write it down as is the average of h of v when you integrate over all values of a based on the conditional distribution of v given x. Taking the derivative, this is the derivative of x here, giving this belief, how the belief is changing with x. You can, of course, multiply and divide by the same number, doesn't change anything. Okay, so we divide and multiply by the belief given exactly f of x star. Okay, and you I don't know, so maybe we can skip this. You subtract some term and which has zero effect on the value of the integral, and it follows pretty immediately that the derivative is positive at this point. Yeah.
So what this result says is that good firms we should then, and bad firms we should equity, right?
Yeah. So you have this force, but the conclusion that it's going to be in equilibrium because of this reason, things would unravel.
This force is then force.
Right. So far we concluded that so let me just repeat what Jose was saying, is so far the single crossing, maybe it's more important than this proof is this intuition that strong firms, meaning higher x, are going to be tempted to offer debt, while weaker types are going to be tempted to offer, say, equity or any other security. But this in equilibrium would force everyone to choose debt. Okay. This force that the investor recognizes, this effect will pull everyone into debt. Okay. Actually, it's why this is the case. It's almost obvious. So maybe I can, using this picture here, more or less can give it here. Right? So if you have, say, some set of types picking security 2 and some set of type picking a security 1. Right? Now, for both securities to be offered in equilibrium, okay, it has to be the case the entrepreneur thinks that the investor thinks that they get a value of I from the entrepreneur. Okay, so again, for both securities to being offered with positive probability in equilibrium, the investors have to be convinced that no matter what, whether or not it's security 1 or security 2, right, the value of what they capture is I. Is the same value. Okay. Now, we said that low types, here the choice is by low types, and here is by higher types. Okay. Now, let's try to think about what do we mean by low types and high types? The highest type here is lower than the lowest type here. It's not just this is low types and high types on average. It's actually that every type here is lower than every type here. Okay, so that's fact number 1. Fact number 2, if we are a set of types that offering a security that is being valued by the market as I, we have cross-subsidization. Among our group, there are stronger types. I give a package which is more than I, and lower types, we are giving a package which is, the value is lower than I. Okay, so high types in this set subsidize the low types. Okay, so again, in a pool of entrepreneurs who offer a security that is being valued by the market as I, there is cross-subsidization. High types subsidize low types. Because the market, it just takes the average. When he values this security, he thinks to himself, well, I value it is I because it might be the high type there or the low type there, I'm not sure. So I'm picking like some average value. Okay, so given this, you ask yourself here, how can it be that both securities are being offered in equilibrium? Okay. Think about the highest type here in this pool of investor of types here. He's subsidizing types in his pool. He's the strongest type in the low types pool. Okay. And now he asks himself, why don't I switch to security 1? Instead of providing a positive subsidy, I'm going to be, if I pretend to be, or if I'm going to be offered this security, I'm going to join this set of agents, and now I'm lower than any one of them. Then clearly I'm going to enjoy a positive subsidy. And that's it. Okay? So, as I said, I mean, the single crossing is everything.
What happens if you offer them a different price? Maybe I'm missing something, but if you offer them different prices, so that, for example, if I think about the market, I would say that equity has a different risk premium than debt, and so I'm willing to risk it, something like, I don't know, something in that sense.
But that's not, I mean, so the model is like it's following. We need to raise the funding of I. You pick a security that is being valued by the market as I, that the market is willing to give you this value of I. So you give, I don't know, 20% stake of the firm or a debt with a face value of D, whatever it is, the market has to be willing to give you this value of I. So there are no different prices. You just take this fixed investment. So I think it all boils down to this question here. So the type X selects a security to deliver to the investor. So he picks a security S of X. The entrepreneur optimized by, given that there are like set of securities that the market is willing to price at a price of I. And of course, each type picks the cheapest security to deliver. Okay, and the market, basically, it's like a rational expectation. He's conditional on the set of investors that is consistent with the equilibrium on path. So I think it's there is no scope for the consideration that you mentioned.
So what are the considerations that leads to the fact that you observe both debt and equity? The model which tells us only one, the equilibrium would be only one.
Right.
So what do you think are the reasons why we observe both?
Why in practice we have both? Because there are more things in life than just asymmetric information.
For asymmetric information, you just have one.
Yeah, asymmetric information always push to the least sensitive security. So so Eric may be asking maybe the first order stochastic dominance, but I think that it's more than just arguing about the specific technical condition. It's just that it's, in my view, that asymmetric information always pushes for securities that are less sensitive to private information, and that satisfies this requirement. So the fact that we have other securities, we have other, I don't know, bankruptcy costs. I mean, in finance, we, of course, have other reasons to issue security.
Equity, you could argue for equity on the basis of risk sharing, perhaps?
Risk sharing, avoiding bankruptcy costs, other advantages of the small. Here we focus information asymmetry, so we have to have one of the other ingredients.
But here you're implying that the signal is very good, the smaller
Yeah, but I said, yeah, we do assume strong properties of the information structure, but I don't think that that's that's where the reason why we see other securities. I think it's more like economic reasons why we see other securities being offered. Nikki, yeah. So you want to ask a question of like screening? It's a good question. I don't have. It's a good question of like. I think it's natural that in many cases firms have information advantage compared to investors, but potentially in some other cases you can have it reversed. Yeah.
So which one do you interpret as debt and what is this flat picture?
Again?
Which security do you interpret as debt and what is this flattest picture that debt is?
So debt, I said it's crossing, it's single crossing in the space of V because of this that it's pledging everything for low values and flattens out.
The equilibrium outcome near this S's, right? Which one of those is debt?
S is here, that's,
It's flat,
it's flat, it's going to be this security.
but the picture is that it's increasing, it's not flat.
Yeah, but I'm saying, so debt is also going to be increasing in the space of X. In the space of V, it's completely flat. But given that we work in the space of X, even like a high V here, a high X here, think that it's plausible that there's going to be some bankruptcy. So it's going to be even there, assuming some support which are not trivial, it's going to be slightly positive sloping. But even that, I don't need to assume. I only need that S of V is that S of V is for debt is the flattest securities when we talk about the space of V, and this is maintained in the space of X under my information assumption. Okay. Now, so I more or less gave you the argument of why debt is going to be the unique equilibrium outcome to really figure out, all the details I need to rule out. You can think about pathological equilibria, I would call them, that everyone picks equity, selects equity, but if you switch to debt, you're going to be punished, going to be viewed by the market that you are the absolutely worst type. Okay, so in principle, such equilibria, like typically like in signaling game, we have this pathological equilibrium, and to rule it out, as always, we use some refinement argument to rule out this type of equilibria. Here, the type of refinement that is being used is a D1 refinement. It's not that. So there is, all we need to know that there is, in order to get absolutely the clean result that the debt is a unique equilibrium outcome, you need to make some assumptions about off-equilibrium belief refinement, and here's a relevant equilibrium, off-equilibrium refinement is a D1 refinement. Okay. So I have 4 minutes, so maybe I'll quickly mention, so in the single crossing, we proved this with the paper with Peter and Andy. And his Krepach, and the setup was, yeah.
I'm sorry, just on this last argument. If everyone else is offering equity and I offer debt, and you think I'm the worst type, you get everything. So why don't you accept my deviation?
So let's construct an equilibrium, everybody offering equity, and someone offering debt,
Yes.
and he's being viewed as a worst type.
Right.
That would would sustain the equilibrium, because if you deviate to that, you're going to be viewed as a worst type. You have nothing to gain. So I'm arguing that without...
You have nothing to gain if you really are the worst type. But why won't the investors accept my deviation?
So so you say you accept your... You need, so let's, you need to, Elchanan, let me. So if you offer that, it's being viewed like the worst type.
That's right.
So if you offer that, I'll ask for the face value to be consistent with the lowest type. So it's a really high debt level, because I really view that you're really the lowest type. Okay. So there's going to be a high requirement. If you offer me debt, you really have to offer me a really, really high face value. So people who are now offering equity, maybe it's like everyone is offering equity, getting like 20%. So think about the highest type. He asks himself, well, yeah, I'm a little bit screwed by offering debt, by offering equity, because I'm being viewed as the average type while I'm the highest type. And he thinks to himself, well, should I switch to debt contract? Well, it's going to be even worse. If you switch to debt, he's not going to get like the treatment of an average type. He's going to get the treatment of the lowest type. He's going to be asked to offer like the highest debt possible. Okay. Security auction. So the paper with Peter and with Andy, which how I got into these singular crossing properties. It's a question that looks like this. You have two bidders compete for a project. That's like a typical example. You have a project that required a fixed investment. Revenues are random, but bidders have some values regarding the future revenues. Now, unlike traditional auctions where the offer is in the form of cash, you can think about the bidders offering a security. Okay, so they say, okay, instead of promising you, I'm giving you $1 million in case I'm the winner of this auction. In case I'm the winner of this auction, I'm going to give you 20% of future revenues. Okay, or any other securities that you can think about. Okay, so it's kind of similar to the game that we examined before, but there are some differences. So in 1 minute I cannot not really get into this, but I'm just going to say, so you can ask a question. Suppose that you can restrict the set of securities. The auctioneer restricts the set of securities. Which securities would he choose? And actually what it happens is that it's for his benefit is to choose a security which is very sensitive to the bidder's information. Okay, and you can ask the other question. Suppose that bidders could pick their securities that they offer, and we play this kind of signaling game, and then like the single crossing properties that I had before would generate the same result. That the bidders, if we play like the signaling game, bidders will, in equilibrium, will offer a debt contract, and that in turn will actually generate the lowest revenues for the auctioneer. So like a result, like a first price auction with call options, you have now securities. The auction design is both the auction format and the security design, so it has two dimensions. And one can show is that among all auction format, actually the first price auction, that's the best auction, combined with the security with the highest sensitivity. It's going to be a call option. That is the best for the best choice for the auctioneer. But if we let bidders dictate what securities are going to be offered, they're going to be drawn into this least sensitive security, which in turn is going to generate the lowest revenues for the auctioneer. Okay, so let me stop here. And